father handed me the wheel. We were tooling along East 28th Street, the street I would later visit almost daily, approaching Avenue J from the east. As we were nearing the corner, I turned the wheel to the right, but I had miscalculated and steered the car toward the curb. My mother, appalled at my father's judgment, cried, "Sammy!" My father at once corrected the car's wayward trajectory. I was a little abashed, for I thought I knew what I was doing. It seemed I was less competent than I had imagined. Further practice would have to wait another dozen or so years. In general, he encouraged me to take greater risks than my mother would. I could sense his approval when I sought to go beyond my accustomed limits. What he was strict on was respect. Not for himself, for he could take a lot, but for his wife. Once when I had strutted through the kitchen in a jovial mood and smacked my mother on her bottom as I passed. Greeting her with a shockingly inappropriate, "Hiya, bitch!" He quickly upbraided me for my insolence, and his anger was intimidating. I as quickly understood that I was way out of line. I eventually found new friends on East 24th Street, Clifford Seltzer, and East 23rd Street, Richard Rothstein, and Dominic Petrolango, and East 21st, Joel Fishbein and Ira Warhol. But they weren't Michael Epstein and David Green, nor Buddy, Amy, Marcia, or Mark. Nevertheless, they were to become the most frequent companions of my early adolescence. There was one attempt to bring my two worlds together that turned instead into a final transition. It was Halloween, 1954. Mike Epstein and I went to the Elm Theater on Avenue M, my neighborhood, to see a movie. I had a stick of pastel chalk on me, and I chalked some kid's jacket. He reported me to the matron, and I was thrown out of the theater. Michael tried to argue my case. He's sorry, he won't do it again, but failed to persuade the chief usher. I left, he stayed. Disconsolate, in exile from the palace of pleasure, I met Richie Rothstein on the street. He heard my story and actually persuaded them to let me back in. But I couldn't find Michael. I found out later that he had missed me and gone to my house thinking I must have gone home. There he met my father working in our backyard and asked for a ride back to 28th Street. My father, however, refused, so Michael had to walk home. I was angry at my father when I heard about it. "Why didn't you give him a ride?" I asked. Later I realized my father could have wondered why Michael had come back without me. What kind of a friend is that? I never blamed Michael, though. He fessed up pretty readily to his regret over having stayed in the theater. I can understand. As for my father, well, sure, it was a little selfish of him, I suppose, to refuse to drive Mike home. But think of him. It's the weekend, time off from work, time to work in the garden, one of his great pleasures. And that time was just too precious for him to give it up, to take home a boy who apparently left his younger son in the lurch or something. But the real upshot was that Richie became my best friend in my new neighborhood. And even though that relationship was a little rockier than the one I enjoyed with Mike, there's no reason to suppose it would always have been smooth sailing with him either. Over the years, my mother would occasionally press me to call Mike. Once she reported that he had called our home for me. He was a true friend, and I'm sorry our friendship didn't continue. But without the opportunity for frequent neighborhood contact, I didn't have the tools to nurture it. Okay. So, with your permission, I'm going to read one more section from this series of chapters.
More.
See, do we
Two
need
more.
a brief break? No, we're okay. All right, I just want to check. That's great.
I'm just saying.
It's good.
Okay. It's good to ask.
Yeah, it's good to ask.
This is called Delwood.
What?
Delwood. And that summer I went to camp. Camp Delwood. 7 miles from Honesdale, Pennsylvania, where my brother Jerry was a 14-year-old senior and my cousin Mike a 15-year-old camper waiter. At my mother's behest, my cousin Mike dropped by his 9-year-old cousin's bunk one evening to see how he was getting along. He found me regaling my bunkmates with stories and informed my mother that she had nothing to worry about. Mike was another champion of mine in the family. Even 15 years later, when I had become an itinerant poet in San Francisco, my mother's inquiries about my welfare still continued. Michael nonplussed her by responding, "You worried about Robert?" As was evident, I liked camp. I had a great summer. In one of those late night prepubescent conversations, I was even willing to confess I once showed my prick to a girl. This disclosure was, in fact, an understatement. I had showed my prick to a total of 6 girls,
Oh.
on at least 4 separate occasions. Diane Coleman, Carol Newman, Karen Smith, Sheila, I forget her last name, Sherry, who lived across the street from Michael and wasn't Jewish, who actually touched it, but who shrank away from squeezing it when I urged her to, and Michael's little sister, whom I tried to persuade to show me hers. After many entreaties, she complied, but pulled her polka dot panties down and up so fast, I didn't see a thing. He asked me to show mine to him, but I wouldn't do it, she told her brother. Good girl, he said. Bad girl, I responded, even then knowing it was a cheap shot. His protective attitude by far more praiseworthy than my exploitative one. Of course, the same person would wonder why I did it. And that's what Mike wanted to know, as we strolled in Bedford Avenue toward my house, perhaps on the day of that ill-fated movie matinee. Why? I could not explain it rationally. I could only say, I felt an urge. I even used that word, urge. I added, I hope Judge Leibowitz never finds out. Who was Judge Leibowitz? Mike wanted to know. He was a juvenile court magistrate who had a reputation for imposing stern sentences. He was in all the papers, and I'd come across some description of a trial over which he presided. Like Mr. Blickstein, he represented to me the voice of authority. He was the rule setter, the punisher. I, who so easily transgressed established norms, feared discovery and the consequent penalties, public exposure, and shame most of all. At this point, I was feeling the blowback from my deeds. Very New England Puritan, wouldn't you say? That society where offenders were put in the stocks or were forced to wear a scarlet A. In subsequent years, as the noose of public obloquy tightened, I remember wanting to say something to my father about what I was feeling and the web of circumstances in which I was enmeshed. I stepped into the living room through the fancy swinging doors, like a saloons in painted gold that Jerry and I had insisted made part of our new home's decor, and looked at my father across the room where he sat on the sofa reading the paper by lamplight. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't open my mouth. From him, too, I think I feared rebuke. At camp, I could let down my guard. No one knew, and even my brief announcement made no ripples, stirred no interest. My friendship with Mark Tao, Peter Overfest, and the other boys in the bunk blossomed. With Mark, I could laugh hysterically at the silliest pronouncement. Rabbi Dabbi, the smartest man in history mystery. Like Paul, he was fond of naughty verses. There's a Girl Scout in the grass with a bullet up her ass. Take it out, like a good Boy Scout. With some repetitions, he substituted Arlene in the grass for the anonymous Girl Scout. Who was Arlene? Some girl in the city of whom he was presumably enamored. Pete, let's say, was the more intellectual and the only one who could beat me in a foot race. He lost some of his speed later, but by then I had other competitors, so that, fast as I was, I never became #1. I returned to Delwood every summer until I was 15, and then went to another camp the following year after Delwood's owners, Norm Wolf and Rabbi Aaron, retired from the camping business and sold the old place, probably due in part to the aggravation the waiters caused them that final summer. Most of us had been Delwood campers for many years, but faced a new situation shortly after we arrived and took up our jobs. Rabbi Aaron, Isidore Aaron, had 2 sons who worked at the camp in the summer. Benny, the older one, had been in charge of the kitchen for several years. This summer, though, Norman and Rabbi had hired a new person to run things, and more particularly to supervise us. This fellow, probably an educator like Norm Wolf, took one look at our demeanor and tried to lay down some rules. The most onerous one to us was a requirement that we tuck in our shirts. We wore shirts that buttoned down the front with collars and tails. That was the prevailing style. Our universal preference was to let the tails hang out. Our job consisted of setting the tables, serving the food at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, carrying away the dirty dishes, and cleaning the tables after each meal. It was work. We were proud of the job we did. We had moved up the hierarchical ladder. Our parents paid half the amount that the ordinary campers paid. At the end of the season, we could expect to be given tips by the campers' parents. We served in both dining rooms, the boys' side and the girls' side, and also at the staff table where the rabbi, Norm Wolf, and the head counselor sat. The to-be-brought dining rooms were separated by a row of wooden doors that could be folded open for special occasions. As waiters, we had access to both dining rooms, a singular privilege, for although they were not hermetically sealed, there was an invisible line between the 2 domains. Into this delicately balanced situation strode our new overseer. He gave the order that we tuck in our shirt tails, and we refused. One by one, the rabbi approached us. I was not one of the early ones, but eventually he found me, improperly attired, and asked, "Robert, would you please tuck in your shirt?" "No." "Then you have to go outside with the others." By the end of the meal, all of us were on strike. We had a second cause, Mark Tao. Mark had discovered that he could squirt lighter fluid in his hand and ignite it and come to no harm. In our double wooden bunkhouse, he sprayed a stream of lighter fluid along the floor, lit it, and watched it burn out. We saw that it was harmless. The fire was never hot enough to catch onto the wood, and the fluid evaporated quickly. Into this mellow scene stepped our head counselor on a routine inspection tour. Appalled at what he saw, he took steps to expel Mark from camp. We wanted him back. At our caucus, we formulated two demands: an end to the new dress code and a reprieve for Mark. Shabbat fell between our inner conference and the meeting with the directors and staff on Sunday. We dressed in our Shabbos attire and attended services, filing into the back row and sitting on the green and gold wooden benches, our camp colors, in the rec hall. Our behavior was respectful. We had no issue with Judaism, nor the form of Judaism promulgated by the rabbi. Our issue was the dining room and the new standards imposed by the new supervisor. We demonstrated our essential loyalty while holding on to our principal differences. We chose Pete as our representative, our spokesperson. His diplomatic hedging soon got on Richie Lasky's nerves. "Stop beating around the bush, Pete. Tell him what we decided." "Okay," said Pete. "We want the new rule rolled back, and we want Mark to stay." The rabbi and York made two remarkable statements in response to these demands. First, they appealed to authority, their own. They actually said that they could not back down because doing so would undermine their authority. What a crappy answer. They pretty much admitted they had no good reason not to let the rules revert to what they had been before. Right or wrong, they had to back up their guy, the new maitre d'. As for Mark, they said that he'd been troubled from the time he first enrolled in camp till now. That hurt us too. Imagine them having reservations by one of our own every year. Like me and Pete, he'd been coming to Delaware every summer for 7 years. But now that he had done something very dangerous, they had no recourse but to send him home. Not only that, but everyone who refused to cooperate with the new rules would have to go home too. Such individuals could call their parents right now and ask to come home. We got online, every one of us. We called our parents, one after the other, on the only outside line in camp. Every single parent said they would not countenance our coming home. We should stay for the duration of the summer. My own mother, when I spoke to her, said, "Oh, Robert, these kinds of things happen, and it's not worth throwing away a summer vacation for it. Besides, what would you do at home?" Pretty much a standard response. I suspect that the directors called every single kid's parents before the meeting, explained that there was a rebellion going on over a very minor matter, and that one of the boys had done a very dangerous thing which required his immediate expulsion. The others could stay if they followed the rules, and no refunds could not be made in the case of boys who refused to return home. The unanimity of their responses took us by surprise and left us little choice. We were stuck. But that was Delaware's last summer.